After last episode, I kept thinking about something. We spent a solid hour on freight fraud, the cargo theft numbers, the identity schemes, the double brokering, all of it. And that conversation was worth having because the problem is real and it's getting worse. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a different thought kept surfacing. Not about fraud specifically, but about the bigger feeling underneath it. The one that's harder to point at directly, but that a lot of drivers are carrying around right now, whether they name it or not. It's the sense that everything got heavier at the same time. Not one thing, not one bad quarter or one bad policy or one category of problem you can isolate and fix. Just this broad, grinding pressure coming from multiple directions at once. Rates, costs, compliance, fraud, parking, time, all of it tightening simultaneously while the industry keeps using words like recovery and stabilization that don't quite match what the week actually felt like. That's what I want to talk about today. Not the fraud headline, the full picture. The trucking squeeze of 2026, what's actually driving it, and why so many drivers right now feel like they're doing everything right and still losing ground. This is Behind the Wheel. Welcome back to Behind the Wheel, the show where we talk trucking the way drivers actually live it. No corporate talking points, no fake optimism dressed up as industry analysis, no pretending the market is turning a corner just because somebody with a presentation said so. Just honest conversation from the driver's seat about what's actually going on out here. If you're new to the show, glad you found it. If you've been riding with us for a while, you already know how we do this. Today we're picking up the thread from last episode and pulling it further, because freight fraud is one part of a much larger story. And I think that larger story is the one that actually explains why so many people in this industry feel the way they feel right now. Not panicked, not hopeless, but genuinely worn down in a way that goes beyond any single problem. Let's get into it. Let's start with the freight fraud numbers, since that's where we left off, because they didn't improve while we were talking about them. Veris CargoNet's 2025 analysis put estimated cargo theft losses at nearly $725 million for the year, up significantly, while confirmed theft incidents rose 18% and the average value per theft climbed 36%. That last number is the one worth sitting with for a second. It's not just that more theft is happening, it's that the theft that is happening is more targeted and more damaging per event. This isn't a volume problem getting worse. It's a sophistication problem getting worse, which is a harder thing to solve. But here's where the broader picture comes in. Even setting fraud completely aside, the financial environment in trucking right now is difficult in ways that compound on each other, in ways that are hard to fully separate. Commercial Carrier Journal, covering FTR's 2026 market outlook, described the current environment as a slow, grinding recovery, with weak rate growth and more carrier failures still expected. That phrase, slow, grinding recovery, is doing a lot of work. It's the industry's polite way of saying things are not getting worse as fast as they were, which is not the same thing as things getting better. And drivers hear recovery and reasonably ask, recovering toward what exactly? Because if fuel still costs what it costs, if insurance is still climbing, if the rate environment improved just enough to technically count as movement without actually making the math work, then recovery is a word that describes a chart, not an experience. ATRI's ongoing research continues to surface the same cluster of concerns at the top of driver and carrier priority lists: the broader economy, insurance costs, litigation pressure, and truck parking. None of those are surprises if you've been in this industry for any length of time, but the fact that they keep sitting at the top of the list year after year is itself a data point. It means these aren't temporary disruptions working their way through the system. They're structural features of the environment that drivers are expected to operate inside of indefinitely. And then there's the compliance side, which is adding its own weight right now. FMCSA's registration modernization push, designed in large part to address the fraud problem by adding identity verification, business validation, and more thorough security checks to the carrier registration process, is a legitimate response to a real problem. Nobody serious is arguing that the fraud environment doesn't need a systemic answer. But the practical experience of more verification requirements, more documentation, more steps between a legitimate operator and operational status is still friction. Even when it's well-intentioned friction, it still lands on the people who are already compliant and adds to the load they're carrying. That's the paradox of regulatory response in trucking. The fixes and the problems have a way of arriving together. What all of this adds up to is a freight environment that's genuinely difficult to navigate without feeling like you're always just slightly behind where you're trying to be. That's the headline. I want to talk about something that doesn't always get acknowledged directly when people discuss industry conditions, which is the difference between a business having a hard stretch and a person carrying the weight of that hard stretch. Those aren't the same experience, and in trucking, the distance between them is part of what makes the current moment feel the way it does. When the industry is under pressure, the people who feel it most concretely are not the ones presenting at conferences about market cycles. They're the owner-operators watching an insurance renewal come in and doing the math on what that does to the week. They're the small fleet operators absorbing a canceled load or a late broker payment at the exact moment when the timing couldn't be worse. They're the company drivers who don't see the insurance bill directly, but absolutely feel it in how dispatch behaves when margins get thin, in the quality of loads, in the pressure around miles, in the way flexibility disappears when the business side gets squeezed. The squeeze is real at every level. It just shows up differently depending on where you're standing. What I think gets underestimated is how much the cumulative nature of it wears on people. It's not usually one catastrophic event that breaks someone's confidence in this industry. It's the accumulation. It's every load you scrutinize a little more carefully because you're not sure what's real anymore. It's every rate that makes you wonder whether bad has quietly become the new normal. It's the parking situation at the end of a day that already didn't go the way it was supposed to. It's the compliance requirement that feels like it was designed by someone who has never been inside a cab. None of those things individually is the thing that gets you. It's all of them showing up at once, week after week, creating this low-grade but persistent feeling that the job is harder than it needs to be, and that nobody upstream is in any particular hurry to change that. That wears on people in ways that are hard to quantify, but very easy to feel. And it changes the tone of the industry too. Trucking right now has a particular kind of tension to it. Not desperation, not resignation, but a guarded, calculating wariness that shows up in how people talk about loads, about brokers, about rates, about the future. People are still out here working. They're still adapting and moving and figuring it out the way drivers always do. But the ease is gone, if there was ever much of it to begin with. Right now, staying in this business requires a level of sustained alertness to fraud, to rates, to compliance changes, to market conditions, that is genuinely exhausting on top of the actual work of driving. I also want to be honest that not everybody in trucking is experiencing this the same way. Some operations are structured well enough, diversified enough, or operating in the right lanes to weather this stretch without feeling it as sharply. Markets shift. Some carriers will come out of this period in better shape than others. That's true and worth acknowledging. But it doesn't change what the majority of drivers, especially the owner-operators and small carriers who are closest to the cost of everything, are experiencing right now. In the version of the trucking conversation that talks only about the parts of the industry that are holding up, while ignoring the parts that are genuinely struggling, isn't honest. It's the industry talking to itself rather than to the people actually running the trucks. The honest version is simpler and less comfortable. The frustration is real, it's coming from real places, and it deserves to be taken seriously, rather than managed with optimistic language. Here's where I land on all of this. And I want to be direct about it because I think the trucking conversation tends to drift toward one of two unhelpful poles. Either everything is catastrophically bad and the industry is collapsing, or things are recovering and we just need to stay positive. Both of those framings let the industry off the hook for the things that are actually fixable, which is where I think the real conversation needs to live. On the fraud side, the response has to be serious enough to actually reach the bad actors, rather than just adding friction for the legitimate ones. More verification requirements and better identity security at the registration level are the right instincts. But if the end result is that honest carriers spend more time and energy proving they're real, while the fraudulent ones rotate through new entities faster than the system can track them, then the compliance burden has been redistributed rather than the fraud problem solved. The people building the regulatory response need to be clear-eyed about that risk, and the industry associations advocating on behalf of carriers need to hold them to it. On rates and compensation, the market will do what markets do, and nobody's suggesting the industry can legislate its way to better spot rates. But the carriers and brokers who depend on drivers to perform at a high level while paying at the low end of what the market will allow are not building something sustainable. The phrase you hear sometimes, that the industry needs to attract and retain professional drivers, is true, but it's only true in a way that costs something. Professional compensation, honest load information, and conditions that make the work worth doing are not features of a premium operation. They're the baseline cost of having a professional workforce. The distance between what the industry says it values and what it actually builds around is still significant, and drivers notice. On truck parking, which somehow keeps showing up on the top of ATRI's concern list year after year after year, at some point the industry has to stop calling this a known issue and start treating it like the ongoing infrastructure failure that it is. Acknowledging a problem for a decade without solving it isn't engagement, it's management of expectations. Drivers who end every day navigating a parking shortage that was entirely predictable and entirely preventable deserve better than another round of, "We're aware of the issue." And on the broader squeeze itself, the feeling that the job got heavier from multiple directions simultaneously, I think the most useful thing this show can do is keep calling it what it is. Not catastrophizing it, not minimizing it, but being honest about the gap between where the industry says it is and where drivers actually are. Because that gap matters. It matters for retention, for safety, for the quality of the workforce, and for the long-term viability of an industry that depends on people choosing to stay in it. Trucking has always produced adaptable, resilient people. That's not a myth. Drivers figure things out, they adjust. They keep the freight moving through conditions that would break a lot of other industries. But resilience is not the same as inexhaustibility. In the habit of treating driver adaptability as a substitute for structural improvement, as a reason not to fix things because drivers will absorb it anyway, is exactly the mentality that makes the squeeze worse over time rather than better. The fixes need to show up in real life, in loads that pay what the work actually costs, in a compliance environment that protects honest operators without burying them, in a parking infrastructure that treats the end of a driver's day as something worth planning for, in a fraud response that goes after the bad actors rather than making the good ones prove themselves indefinitely. That's what improvement looks like from the seat, not a recovery on a chart, not a stabilizing market in a forecast. The actual daily experience of the job getting measurably better. Until it does, drivers are right to keep their guard up, pay attention to where the industry is still falling short, and talk honestly about what this stretch has actually felt like. That's what this show is here for, and that's what we'll keep doing. Whew, that's it for today's episode of Behind the Wheel. I appreciate you being here. I want to hear from you. What's been the biggest pressure point in trucking from your seat lately? What's the one thing making this job harder than it needs to be right now? Drop it in the comments, because those conversations matter, and they're going to keep shaping what we talk about on this show. If you enjoyed this one, make sure you're subscribed. Next time, we're going deeper on double brokering specifically, why it's still as bad as it is, why the cleanup has taken this long, and what it would actually take to fix it properly. I'll catch you in the next one. Stay safe, stay sharp, and keep it rolling. Hoof.